Welcome back, guys. I'm Dave from the Kodo, back with my third part of my Raspberry Pi RetroPie setup series. In the first video, we showed you how to get the system up and running, just so you know that it's functioning. In the second video, we added the ROMs to the Raspberry Pi, and as you can see, I have the Super Nintendo emulator available to me. In this last video, what I'm going to show you is how to get the controller to function properly with the games, not just the GUI, but the games. Now, depending on the controller you choose, you can use 360 controllers. There is support for that. PS3 controllers. I'm using, and let me show you the box. I'm just using a generic Super Nintendo USB or SNES USB controller. It was like $5 on Amazon. They shipped it to me. It was made for Windows and Mac. Nothing special, but it works. Now, this setup is going to be for generic controllers, not specifically 360s or the 360 controller or the PS3 controller, but just like a generic off-brand controller, either Nintendo, the USB controllers that you're going to use. So, what we're going to need first is the Raspberry Pi is going to need to be on and connected to your network. And the program we're going to need to download is called PuTTY. And so you're going to go to putty.org, you're going to go to download PuTTY, and it's the oldest, crappiest looking website in the world, but it does what it needs to do. It has the file that we need. It's a very small file, so you're going to want to download putty.exe. Once you load up putty.exe, you're going to see that it's a very small program. This all it's going to do is allow you to connect to the Raspberry Pi and do some behind-the-scenes connections, changes to the system, so that you can get the controller up and running. Now, in the previous video, I showed you that I use Fing to get my Raspberry Pi's IP address. Now, that hasn't changed for me. For you, it may be different, but you're going to want to know your Raspberry Pi's IP address. Like I said, I use an application on my cell phone that allows me to see what's connected to my network and what the IP address is. The IP address is all we're going to need here. So put it in there. Mine's 192.168.1.147. Like I said, this is going to be different for you. Port 222 is going to be fine. So we're going to open that up. And you're going to see it's going to have a login page here. Now, the default for the Raspberry Pi is username Pi and password Raspberry. Now, depending on if you've changed this is going to be different for you, but by default, this is what it is for your Raspberry Pi. There we go. Not the prettiest looking thing, but it'll work because you can see it now. Now, this is we're in the command line for the Raspberry Pi, and if I do an ls, which is going to show me what's in that folder, you'll see that there's RetroPie setup. To set up the controller, we're going to want to go into RetroPie. Now, so type cd for change directory space RetroPie dash setup. Now, capitalization is important here. It has to be exact. So once we hit enter, you'll see that we're in the next zone, or we're in the next folder. So we're gonna hit ls again, and you're gonna see that there's a couple of files here. The green one we're looking at is retropie_setup.sh. So what we're gonna do is do sudo for superuser do /retropie_setup.sh. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna run that script. And if it gives you this, just go ahead and hit yes. The SD card I'm using is not the best in the world, so it gives me some issues, but it's fine. Once you get into here, I highly recommend jumping in and probably run the update RetroPie setup script. That's just going to say, hey, run it. It updates it. It gives you all the latest stuff. But if you just downloaded it, it's not necessary, but if you're going to try and use a 360 controller or a PS3 controller, you definitely need to update the setup script. Otherwise, go into Setup, hit Enter, and the one you're going to be looking for is Register RetroArch Controller. So we're going to hit enter on this. And this is going to tell me that connect only the controller that is going to be used for this setup. So obviously connected to my Raspberry Pi is my USB Super NES controller. I'm going to hit enter. Now what this is saying is basically that make sure you press all the buttons on the controller if it's brand new, because some controllers come out new and the button will be stuck down, and you don't want to screw up this up because you have to go back through it. Now, because I'm using the Super Nintendo controller, there's going to be some options that are going to be scrolling down that are not going to match the buttons that I have on this controller. And when I get to them, I'm not going to press anything. I'm just going to let it time out. So it's going to put a blank in there. So when I'm ready, I'm going to press enter, and I'm going to press the B button, the Y button, and you can see that it's just asking for what button to press next. Start. I'm going to go up, down, left, and right. I've got my A button. I've got my X button. I've got my left shoulder button, my right shoulder button, and now it's asking for L2. Now, I've already used all the buttons that I have on my Super NES controller. Obviously, this will be set up for like generic 360 or generic PS3 controllers. So I'm not going to press anything, and I'm just going to let these time out because it's going to put a blank in there. If I press anything on here, it's going to tie that button press to whatever I press on here, and it's going to screw stuff up. So for now, I'm going to set down the controller. I'm going to let this time out because I don't have these options to press on my Super NES controller. And if you're doing like a generic Nintendo controller where you have even less options, you're going to be sitting here watching this for a minute. And we're almost done here. Alright, so now it says that the configuration file has been saved, and it'll be used whenever the controller is connected. So it's good to go. So I'm going to press OK. And what I'm going to do now is I'm actually just going to cancel out of here. Now you can see that there are other options in here, like install Xbox controller 360 driver, PS3 controller driver, those things. So if you're using those controllers, you can install these drivers and they'll function. They have to be connected USB in there, or if you're using Bluetooth for the PS3 controller, that kind of thing. But for most generic controllers, you're going to want to do register RetroArch controller. So I'm going to leave here. I'm going to perform a reboot on that, which is then going to shut down my Pi. We'll cut back over here and wait for this to reboot back up. And like I said in the last video, we added a ROM, Super Mario World, or Super Mario All-Stars, to the RetroPie, or to the Raspberry Pi, so we can try it out. Now, once this finishes booting back up, we'll be able to see if the controller not only controls the GUI, but also controls the game, which it didn't in the first video because we hadn't set up the controller yet. Alright, so now the Raspberry Pi has completely booted back up into RetroPie. I'm going to jump over to Super Nintendo again, press the A button, and as you can see, I still only have the one ROM. I have Super Mario All-Stars with Super Mario World. We're going to select that. It's going to boot up that ROM. And you'll see down here at the bottom, notice there's a little flash, and you might have seen it in the last video, but it notices that there's a configuration for the joystick, which means when I press start, it's actually going to start to register it on the game. Now, this was one of my favorite games of my childhood, was because I had all of these games all in one. So let's just jump in. My wife's favorite game is Super Mario 2. Select that. Select a new file, and you can see that the controller is responding. So we know that the configuration is working. Now, in the case where you may have run into issues where your controller is not functioning with the RetroPie, definitely suggest running over to the RetroPie website. It's blog.petrockblock.com/RetroPie. Like I said, I'll put that link in the description below. But there is a forum there, and depending on the version of your controller, if you're having issues, chances are somebody else has tried that controller, and you may be able to find some help on here as to what custom settings you may have to do for that controller. So hopefully this video was helpful to you. If it was, leave a comment in the comment section. Give me a like. Check out my channel for some more tips, tricks, tutorials, guides, LPs, video game plays, all of the above. And like always, guys, good luck and have fun.